Good morning, Morai Rabotai, Bruchim Abayim. We are continuing on Masechet Succah, and we are on Daf Kafchet, Amud Aleph, about 2 lines down from the beginning of the wide lines. Today's Amud is being learned as a zchut for Refuah Shelema of Rachel Simcha Bat Nahid, and especially dedicated for Refuah Shelema of Michael Ben Nahid, that should have full recovery. Refuah Shelema, Be'ezrat Hashem. Amen. It's one of our own. Chevra, we daven for him, and the learning of the month has been graciously dedicated by the Kohen family, by Dayan family, by Shei families. It should be an ultimate zchut for all the mishpachot. Be'ezrat Hashem, amen. So we are continuing in the incredible, fascinating story of Rabbi Eliezer, the student, a disciple of Rabban Yochanan ben Zakkai. And one of the things that the Gemara mentioned is Rabbi Eliezer never said, he had such dedication to his Rebbeim that he never said things that he didn't hear from them. And the Gemara goes on to say the midot, the attributes of his Rebbe, Rabban Yochanan ben Zakkai, and as we will see, the Gemara is going to say at the end that anything that Rabban Yochanan ben Zakkai excelled in, Rabbi Eliezer, his student, also adapted the same exact attribute as his Rebbe. So hence we're going to learn the second wide line of Kafchet Amud Aleph. Amru alav al Rabban Yochanan ben Zakkai. Rabban Yochanan ben Zakkai, he was one of the students of Hillel HaZaken, one of the Talmid Muvhaks of Hillel HaZaken, and the Gemara says in Masechet Rosh Hashanah that he was, in the beginning of his life, he was a businessman for 40 years. He worked, and then he learned, and he led for the next 40 and the next 40, the 120 years of his fruitful life was divided to those 3 categories of involved in the world, understanding the world, and learning Torah, in a dedication that's tremendous, as we'll see in just a moment, and then leading Klal Yisrael through the most difficult and turbulent times. He was the Nasi during the Churban actually happening. We all are familiar with the Gemara in Masechet Gittin, how he was the one that had to pretend he's dead to be able to be let by Bar Yonim outside of the walls of Yerushalayim to speak to the Roman general and to plead on behalf of the Jews. And his nephew was one of the heads of the Bar Yonim, or the head of the Bar Yonim, and so on and so forth. We're familiar with that. That was probably one of the most turbulent times of Klal Yisrael. So he was the Nasi, as we will discuss some more about the economy of his life and his experience. But nevertheless, says the Gemara, Amru alav Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai, miyamav lo sach sichat chulin. Never in his career he spoke idle talk. Everything that he said was completely gecheshbon. He was methodically thought through, very thoughtfully designed. Velo alach dalet amot belo Torah ubelo tefillin, and he didn't walk 4 amot even without Torah or tefillin. The way we explained this yesterday, based on the Rambam. Rambam writes this again in the Chot Tefillin, Perek Dalet, Halacha Kavhei. He speaks about Rav, the Talmid of Rabbeinu HaKadosh, that he never walked 4 amot without either having tefillin on or being involved in learning or having at least the tzitzit on. And we mentioned before that, again, that answers the question of how you could be machmir on always having tefillin if night is not zman tefillin, right? That's a sugya in Masechet Zvachim that we discussed before, that perhaps Laila is not Zman Tefillin, or even if it is, we nowadays stay away from wearing Tefillin at night because of the Chashash of Shema Yishan Bahem, Shema Yafiach Bahem. But nevertheless, Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai, you never found him without one of these 2, either learning or at least having Tefillin. So says the Gemara, Ubelo tefillin velo kedamo adam bebet hamidrash. He was always the first person in the Bet Midrash. Velo yashen bebet midrash lo shenat keva velo shenat arai. He never slept in the Bet Midrash, even what it is mutar to sleep. Again, we mentioned before the Gemara in Sanhedrin Daf Ayin Aleph discusses that the person that sleeps in the Bet Midrash, it damages his Torah. Naaset Torah karaim karaim, that it becomes like shreds the Torah. Can't do that. You have to be awake when you're awake, and you have to be involved in learning when you are trying to learn. But Shenat Arai is mutar in the Bet Midrash, and nevertheless, Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai did not even sleep Shenat Arai ever. Now, this, by the way, all these things that we say, it's easier for a person to do one day, to get excited, to be all on fire, and do it. But for a person to say, I consistently did something in my life, never changed it. You never saw him without Torah Tefillah. You never saw anybody else be first in the Bet Midrash. And the Gemara says, Velo, he never thought of Divrei Torah in dirty alleyways. Now, this really needs to borrow a piece from the Gemara in Masechet Brachot of Kaf Dalet Amud Bet. The Gemara there says a machloket in the Gemara, whether it is mutar to think of Divrei Torah in a dirty place. Now, saying Divrei Torah is asur. But how about just thought process? You're in the mikveh, whatever it is, you want to be thinking about the Amud Yomi of today, doing a quick chazara. Is that mutar? Is that not mutar? And the Gemara has a discussion. So the simple understanding of this would be that Rabban Yochanan ben Zakkai really held that hirhur in Mevuot HaMetunafot is mutar. And yet he was machmer, because we are counting his chumras, right? The things that... But the Rashba learns this Gemara differently. The Rashba learns that a person that is always in thoughts of Torah, is difficult for them to stop and go. It's difficult. And his greatness was, even though that he never was caught without Torah, he was always in thoughts of Torah, he was completely in control and aware of where to stop, where to start. They say about the Ragat Shavar Gaon that his mind was so involved with learning that it was hard for him in the bathroom even not to think of Torah. It's a difficult thing. The Ben Ish Chai actually writes that the Gidolei HaChachamim, that their mind is always busy with Torah, they are almost anus. They can't control it. They cannot do it, right? And therefore, Chacham Obadiah, when he was at the very last period of his life, when he lost his brother and then his son within a short span of time. Rabbi Yaakov, alav shalom, his oldest son, passed away months before Chacham Obadiah himself passed away. And Obadiah, when he was in the period of Avelut, someone found him sitting with Sfarim and writing, learning Hilchot Shabbat. So he said, look, I just finished writing on Avelut when I was in the previous thing of Avelut. I can't go back and learn it again. I just learned it. I just wrote on it. And if I don't learn, I'll die. It's like anus. This in the level of Chacham Obadiah, that was where he was holding. So it says Ben Ish Chai, some people could be anus. And the greatness of Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai was that he could be completely in control when he had to learn, when he had to stop. Everything was everything was completely under control, methodically thought through, and properly decided, and that's greatness. That's absolute greatness. Says the Gemara, Adam bebet hamidrash veyatza. He never left anybody in the Bet Midrash. When he left, he was always the last person. He was always the first person. He was always the last person. Velo metzao adam yoshev v'domem. You never found him sitting doing nothing. Even, in other words, even in the thoughts of Torah, he was always sitting and learning. You saw him always busy with learning. And yoshev v'shoneh. He was always, and there's not a moment that he had like quiet moment. He's learning constantly any wake moment of his day. Velo patach adam delet letalmidav elahu. Nobody else opened the door for his students besides him. Now, this doesn't necessarily mean that no one else in the world opened the door for the Talmidim. That may be also. But what he means is, his Talmidim were always let into the Bet Midrash by him. He would sit next to the door, and he was the one to open the door for the students. The Rishonim, right? This was in order to not get into a machloket for the Talmidim, who is going to have the zchut to open the door for the other people. He was the one that opened the door, but really, the sugya in Masechet Yoma, Daf Lamed Hey, there the Gemara speaks about Hillel HaZaken, the Rebbe of Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai, who was a poor man. Right? The Gemara there says, Hillel mechayev aniyim, that if a person comes after Ma'abe stream up there and says, Hashem, I couldn't learn Torah because I was ani, they're like, you're more ani than Hillel. Hillel was the ani marud shebe merudim, and yet he learned. And then the Gemara there explains that he made a little coin every day. 1/3 of it he had to give to Shomer HaPetach, the one that guarded the Bet Midrash, and it was basically the Shamash, the Gabbai, that would protect the Bet Midrash, let people in, and so on. He would charge, he had to give money to go in. And one day Hillel didn't have the money, right? And this is the Shmaya Vavtalion's yeshiva, right? And it was a snowy day, like everyone knows this story. He went to the Aruba, and the rest is history. That's Hillel. And then they say, okay, now you can come in for free. But so Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai made sure that in his yeshiva this doesn't happen. There's no charge. He was the Shomer HaPetach. He was the one that will open the door for all of his Talmidim. But again, the humility and dedication that nobody ever opened. He was always there to let the students in. A tremendous thing, you know. And he never said anything that his Rebbe didn't say. Now, the truth of the matter is, we find Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai that he made several different gezerot after the Churban and so on, as it is discussed in different places in Shas. So maybe this is talking about some of the Achronim, right? That this is talking about so long as his Rebbe was alive, he never said anything as a sign of not just dedication to transmit the Torah of the Rebbe, but also as a sign of kavod that I don't say anything that I didn't directly hear from my Rebbe, but maybe afterwards he did. He never stopped the shiur. He never stopped the Bet Midrash. It's okay, now let's go home. He never stopped the shiur aside from 2 days during the course of the year. Chutz me'arve Pesachim, Erev Pesach, which Saudi Rishonim write because of Korban Pesach. They look at Rashi. It's Korban Pesach because before the Churban, you had Korban Pesach, you had the Bet HaMikdash, and he lived and led through those years. But after the destruction of the Bet HaMikdash, you don't have Korban Pesach. So there are others who learn. Arve Pesachim means that you want to go put your kids to sleep, little kids that you want them to be up. You need a father to kind of run the Erev Pesach. If you want to have successful Pesach night, you have to have first a successful Erev Pesach, and you have to be present there. So therefore, he would send the Talmidim home to go take care of their families. The Arbe Yom Kippurim, of course, the Erev Yom Kippur is a mitzvah to eat, so therefore you want to take away a little bit even from the learning to be able to have the mitzvah of Achilah on Erev Pesach. On Erev Yom Kippur, rather. And everything and anything that he did, Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai, Rabbi Eliezer Agadol, Rabbi Eliezer ben Hurkanus, who was his dedicated disciple, he also adapted all of those things. So now you see that the few things that Rabbi Eliezer said himself about himself that we learned yesterday is not all, because he also had all of these things. Right? He only was telling people that I never missed a thing that my Rebbe said, because I always was the first one, I always was the last one. I never slept and I never schmoozed in the Beit Midrash. So I was listening the entire time, and therefore I could say to you that everything I tell you is directly from my Rebbe. It's everything and nothing missing and nothing from myself. Tanu Rabbanan, we learned, Shemonim Talmidim hayu lo leHillel HaZaken. Hillel HaZaken had 80 dedicated Talmidim. Sheloshim mehen, 30 of them, the top 30, Reuyim shetishre alein Shechina keMoshe Rabbeinu. They were fit for the Shekhinah to rest upon them like Moshe Rabbeinu. Now, a few things over here. First of all, the Gemara in Sanhedrin, Daf Yud Aleph, says that when people were sitting in Aliyah in Yericho, a bat kol came. As the Gemara there is discussing that even after the Bet HaMikdash, when Nevuah was not there, we had bat kol, right? HaKadosh Baruch Hu relayed messages and communicated with us through bat kol. So the Gemara says these zakenim were all sitting in the Aliyah in Yericho, and a bat kol came speaking to all of them, saying, there is somebody sitting here right now that he is fit that the Shekhinah should rest upon him like Moshe Rabbeinu. And all of them simultaneously looked at who? Hillel HaZaken. So Hillel was the person that was Ra'uish Tishre Shekhinah Alav Ke-Moshe. And the Maharsha in the back of the Gemara, not here, but the Masechet Baba Batra, Daf Kuf Lamed Dalit, there the Maharsha says that when we say the top 30 students of Hillel, is indicative that the 30 top Talmidim, they reached the Madriga of the Rebbe. They became like Hillel. They got to the same Madriga as him. Now, what does that mean exactly? That they were like Moshe Rabbeinu. So, everyone knows the famous words of the Rambam. Rambam writes this in Chot Shuvah. I believe it's in Perek Bet, Halacha Hey. Look it up to make sure. But towards the beginning of he says a person should never think that they are far and that Moshe Rabbeinu was, a person that does what they can do 100% of their level, they achieve their potential 100%, they will be just like Moshe Rabbeinu. Like they will sit next to Moshe Rabbeinu in Gan Eden. That's how it would be, right? Every person that maximizes their potential, they're like Moshe Rabbeinu. By the way, in the Gemara, when the Gemara wants to speak about a person that's considered the Gadol Ador, right, in their generation, in respective generation, talking about the generation of Amoraim, it says Moshe Shapir Kamrat, right? Moshe, you said good, even though that he's talking about one of the Amoraim. We call them a nickname of Moshe. That means the Gadol Ador. Because Moshe Rabbeinu lives through, his Madrega lives through the generations based on maximizing one's potential. You can have a regular person that is mamash maximizing their potential, and he is going to be in the eyes of like Moshe Rabbeinu. Now, Maram Chida asks, he says, how in the world can you say that someone that was like Moshe Rabbeinu, one of the principles of faith is, the Ikarei HaEmunah is Lo Kam Navi BeYisrael Ke Moshe Od. No one is ever going to be like Moshe. Right? So how can you say? So first, before we say anything from the Chida, really the Ra'ah, one of the Rishonim answers this question. It's a chas v'shalom to think that this Gemara means that he had the Madriga of Nevuah Moshe Rabbeinu, the chas v'shalom, or the Madriga of Moshe. No. There's two different things. There's the level of Nevuah and the greatness of the closeness to HaKadosh Baruch Hu, and then there's a completely different thing of being a Merkava for Shekhinah, being a platform for Hashrat HaShekhinah. That's a completely different thing. Still a high Madriga, very high Madriga, but we're not talking about the levels of Nevuah at all. We're not talking about that. So it says, in the Gemara, these 30 top ones were like Moshe Rabbeinu. The 30 lower ones were like Yehoshua. Shloshim me'en reuim sh'ta'amod lahem chama ki Yehoshua. They were fit that a nest should happen to them like Yehoshua. What was this nest for Yehoshua? Now this is discussed in Perek Yud of Sefer Yehoshua. The gist of it is like this: when Jews entered Eretz Yisrael, they were one of the nations of the land that were afraid of the Jews. Everyone was afraid of the Jews, but they tried to deceive the Jews by pretending that they are really not from the people of the land. They are travelers. So they brought with them empty containers of water, ripped clothing with dust all over them. And they came and they deceived them. They deceived them and they made this, the Nesi'ei Yisrael took an oath for them that they are going to protect them, they're not going to destroy them. Turns out afterwards that they are Givonim. They are the people of the land. But now they had sworn an oath. Now, but what happened to them afterwards was when the rest of the Amorites, the residents of Eretz Yisrael, found out what the Givonim had done, they said, okay, you're going to get killed for what you did. So they all gathered together and attacked the Givonim. Right? This is an internal war. But because the Jews had sworn an oath to protect them, so Klal Yisrael goes to war with the Amorim to protect the Givonim. Right, Yehoshua is going there, and it was becoming night, and Yehoshua wanted to finish the war, right? If you start a war, you don't release hostages you finish it up, right? So you want to finish, but it's going night. So all of a sudden, he says to the Shemesh, Shemesh begivon dom, the place that they were fighting. Yehoshua says, you stop in mid-air until we finish this. And the Gemara, we had this, for those who remember, a little chazara for Masechet Avodah Zarah, Daf Kaf Hey. We had a whole discussion, Machloket Amoraim, how many hours? Hours and hours. The day was prolonged for this to finish, but it wasn't only that. It was also a nest. HaKadosh Baruch Hu is speaking about the Parashat HaShavua of Makat Barad. We had in Parashat Vayera, it says that when Moshe Rabbeinu davened that Barad, the hail should stop, it says Lo nitach arsa. That means it didn't reach the ground. So whatever was coming up stayed mid-air somehow. So when did the Chazal say, when did it come down? In the time of Givonim, in this Shemesh Pe Givon Dom, HaKadosh Baruch Hu brought Barad, the Avnei Barad on the Amorim as part of the miraculous win that Yehoshua had over all these other nations to save the Givonim. So this was the miracle of Yehoshua, and even though that we find that Moshe Rabbeinu was one of the people that Shemesh stayed for him, right, waited for him. Those who remember when we did Ta'anit together, like we spoke about Naktimon Ben Gurion, we spoke about Yehoshua, we spoke about Moshe Rabbeinu. So why do you say this is special about this? So Ben Ishchai writes over here in Ben Yoyada that Yehoshua's nest was a greater nest because he, first of all, was more hours. It was a clear extension to the day. It was not so, my watch must be broken, the day sounds like a little bigger, but it was like a clear hours and hours extension. And also, it's bigger because he commanded it. It's not that it just happened for him, but he actually caused the nest directly to happen. So it's a greater nest in that sense. And that is the nest that happened with Yehoshua's 30 lower Talmidim of Hillel were in the madrega of closeness to Shekhinah, that miracles of that nature were fit to happen for them. So why didn't you ask, why didn't it? Because She'en Hador Zakai. Because the generation was not fit for him. For a miracle to happen, or for a person to hold an office that's higher than others, it has to be a generation that is befitting for that. Even Moshe Rabbeinu, who spoke Peh vid HaKadosh Baruch Hu, you don't have greater than that, when they did Egel HaZahav, Moshe Rabbeinu lost the madrega. Lech red ki shichet amcha asher hotzeta me'eres Mitzrayim. you go down from your madrega because of the sin they did, and you may or may not realize, but for 38 years almost, the Shekhinah did not speak to Moshe Rabbeinu for the same way. What we have in the Torah is the first year and the last year of the process of Arba'im Shana Akut Bedor Va'omar Am Toeh Levavhem. The 30, almost 8 years in the middle, it was not there because not because Moshe Rabbeinu changed, but because the Jews were not fit for that level. Even that we're talking about Dor De'ah is a tremendous thing to bear in mind as well. And that 30 plus 30 is still 60. We had 80 Talmidim. So the 20 were in the Benonim. They were in the middle, right? So says the Gemara, the 20 Esrim Benonim, Gadol Shebekulam, the greatest of them. Now we generally speaking understand the greatest of all the 80, right? Rabbeinu Gershom in which was one of the door of the Geonim in Tzarfat, in Ashkenaz. He was born Pashto in Tzarfat, and then he was in Ashkenaz. He was one of the great Geonim, the Rebbe of Rashi, basically. You're talking about 2 generations before Rashi. He writes, and this is the Perush that's printed on the side of Abatra in Kuf Lamed Daled. He writes that this is the greatest and the smallest of the 20 middle ones. But again, generally speaking, we understand this to be the greatest of the 80 and the least significant of the 80. Says the Gemara, the greatest of them was Yonatan ben Uziel. Katan shebekulam, the least significant was Rabban Yochanan ben Zakkai. This Rabban Yochanan ben Zakkai that we just spoke about, with all these unbelievable attributes, it was the smallest of them all. Like you can imagine how the greatest one was. So Amru alav Rabban Yochanan ben Zakkai. Now some additional information about Rabban Yochanan ben Zakkai. שלא יניח מקרא ומשנה, גמרא, הלכות, אגדות, דקדוקי תורה, דקדוקי זוברים, קלים וחמורים, גזרות שוות, תקופות, גימטריאות, שיחת מלאכי שרת, שיחת שדים, שיחת קלים, משאלות קופצים, משאלות שואלים, דבר גדול, דבר קטן, דבר גדול. All of these things he knew. Now, I read through them very fast because we're kind of like out of time, but when we explain all these things that we just read, you will see the unbelievable level of Rabban Yochanan ben Zakkai and who he was, and you could imagine who the greatest one, Yonatan ben Uziel, was. And the Gemara ends up saying over here, they said about Yonatan ben Uziel, we're going to come back to this Gemara to explain those things. I want to cut it short, but they said about Yonatan ben Uziel that his holiness of learning Torah was in such way that it was a firework, literally like the kedusha that he had when he sat to learn. Kol of haporeach ba'avir me'al rosho miyad nisraf. If you had a bird, flying above his head, it would be miyad nisraf. You have to talk about the Meiri, how he understands this by itself is a lot to be said about Yonatan ben Uziel. And we'll end with one little thing. The Kotzke Rebbe, Rabbi Menachem Mendel Mikotsk, who was probably the greatest talent, the greatest mind of all the Hasidic leaders of the first generation of Hasidim. And you're talking about real talent. You're talking about the Geonei Olam. And the Kotzke Rebbe was probably one of the greatest of all of them. He had a very sharp personality, but his Hasidut was based on keeping the fire inwardly. Now, nothing people don't see. People see a regular Jew. The Kotzke Rebbe's Hasidim, they daven the regular Shemoneh Esrei. It took the same amount of time as other people, no shackling, nothing, standing straight. But inside, he felt like he's standing outside as if everything is in. But inside, there's a se'ara, there is a hurricane of kedusha going on inside, but it should not be visible to other people. That's how he felt the Hasidut should be, and very befitting. He explains this Gemara. He said, you know what? We don't talk about Hillel. Here's the Rebbe. Did he also have the birds burning up above? He says, no, if you saw Hillel, you would not even know he's Hillel. No bird would be, no fireworks, no birds burning, nothing dying, because he was so great that he could contain all of that, and he saw nothing of it outside. He's a level higher than Yonatan ben Uziel even, which Be'ezrat Hashem will continue. We'll discuss all of this. This is going to be a fascinating next year and the next time we meet Be'ezrat Hashem together. Chazak v'barach.